Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very good day to all of you, my dear students. I hope that you're doing well. A very warm welcome in lecture number 23 of report writing skills. If I talk about our two previous lectures and the topic which we have covered, it was all about how can you be more presentable in front of your audience, your viewers, or who are going to see what you have to offer them in communication. And by communication, I'm also talking about the written as well as your spoken, the verbal, the paraverbal, and non-verbal communications, because this was the special focus of our previous lecture. And if I take you towards those components which we have covered in our previous lecture, it was all about planning your presentation. We talked in detail about the visual aids, what they are, how do you use them, what points should be there in mind while you are about to apply these visual aids, talking about the most commonly used visual aid of PowerPoint presentation, how we can use it, what are its significant points which should be there in mind while using it, while putting content inside the slides of a PowerPoint presentation, then looking in detail towards this opening and closing of your talk with special reference to verbal, paraverbal, and non-verbal communication. And in addition to all this, we finally came towards those points, those factors because of which you feel like getting a bit nervous. And we talked about anxiety and fear, and of course those things, those exercises through which you can become more confident, and at the end of the day, with that confident and strong presentation, you'll of course be getting a positive feedback. But before moving ahead, which is going to be of course our today's topic, just few minutes, or I would say even a minute, regarding the seriousness of the topic that we are going to cover in our today's lecture. And the next lecture following the one that we are covering today will be helping you, will be a direct link to the points that we are covering in our today's lecture. My dear students, if we talk about what we have been doing in the past previous lectures, the point of course was to first of all give you an awareness of report writing, what it is, then going through all the strategies through which you become an efficient writer and through which you are able to simply apply these strategies to do other different forms of writing as well. We talked about it, we looked into the strategies, and of course I recommended you how you can just apply the writing process as well as the C's of communication to come up with your writing. But still, at the end of the day, if there is an individual, I'm not saying in particular, but in general, if there is an individual who is simply collecting things from different resources and then claiming it to be his or her own, that is a serious crime, and it's always recognized by every organization, every workplace, and the whole society, I would say, recognize it to be a crime, a serious crime that is committed by so many individuals, even if we talk about the academic level. So students are doing it all the time without realizing the seriousness of this crime. They're just doing it, taking it as something like a piece of cake, that it is something which can be done easily and no one is going to even bother about it. Well, the point is that it is a crime. It is being observed by all your evaluators, the people who are simply observing you, examining you, and based on this serious crime which is being practiced, which is being committed, then at the end of the day, you have to face the repercussions. Yes, I'm talking about all this copy pasting, this activity of copying things. If I talk about internet, because now this is the age of information technology, things have become quite easier. But taking you towards the past, you opening up a printed version of a book, then finding out some relevant paragraphs, and you simply start writing them the way as they are, written by another writer to whom that book actually belongs. And then at the end of the day, you claiming that you have written it yourself. Do you really think it is possible that it will be accepted? You are simply committing a big crime. And I was thinking about it before delivering this actual lecture. This is even not the case while we are conversing with one another. Whenever you are talking with some other person, and whenever you have to refer to something, some event or some saying of another individual, that he might be or she might be your own friend, but you always say, she said it or he said it, that is how this thing has to be done. He was asking about you. Rather than you asking about about the other person, you always give a reference that if that is the individual who has said something, you always say, he said this and then I said this thing in return. So you are always giving a reference of all the points that is part of a communication. So even in your verbal, common talk, even I would say a gossip, you are always giving reference to other people whenever you have to talk about them, whenever you have to quote them. He was saying this, I replied this thing in return, the other person said that to him. So first the reference, and then you move towards the actual reported speech. First you talk about the person who is speaking, and then what was the actual speech. That is how you make things authentic. Now do you realize the fact how important this thing is? That first you refer to the person whom you are about to quote. And if you do not do so, for example, if we once again give you the context of that communication taking place, if the other person is someone who said something, and rather than you mentioning him, simply say a statement, what would your other person who is in front of you would think? He would or she would simply assume that it's your own statement. So things would come directly towards you. And if you are talking about something bad, of course, so the image would be developed that this is the person who is saying this thing to me. But if there is something bad to mention, of course you're going to first highlight the actual person who has said it. This is the significance of giving a reference that you even do in case of your verbal, common talk, communication. If we talk about the written, the recognized form of communication which is used in professional life, this thing is something which is official, is something part of professionalism, and that's why learning it and realizing it and then practicing it is an important aspect and factor which is going to be covered here. So talking about that crime and looking at its seriousness, the state and its significance, it has been given a name as well, and now let me take you towards that name. It's called plagiarism, and we are going to look into its different definitions. And these definitions are going to help you realize the fact how serious this crime is, as a result of which it's interpreted and it's defined by different forums, different media, different channels. There are so many sources which have defined this crime to make this thing easy for the public to understand that what are the things which falls under the category of plagiarism. So if I take you towards some of the definitions to make you realize what are the things which fall in this category, we start from the Oxford Dictionary, which defines it, what is basically plagiarism: wrongful appropriation or purloining and publication as one's own of the ideas or the expression of the ideas, literary, artistic, musical, mechanical, of another. So basically you are claiming the ideas of another person's ideas and their expression, be they literary, artistic, musical or mechanical. Everything is being claimed to be your own. Talking about Webster's definition, the American concept of how we define plagiarism, to commit literary theft, because it's more or less related to writing. So a theft or a crime of theft which is performed in the form of writing. To commit a literary theft, to present as new and original an idea or a product of that idea derived from an existing source. So you have a source, you have simply derived an idea out of it, and without referring to the actual source, you are claiming that this thing belongs to me or it's my own idea. Another, by of course the Council of Writing Program Administrators, WPA Council, it defines plagiarism as following, and it applies to text published in print, and even online, to manuscripts and to the work of other student writers. Now let's have a look at it. How do we define plagiarism by WPA Council? In an instructional setting, plagiarism occurs when a writer deliberately uses someone else's language, ideas, or other original, not common knowledge material without acknowledging its source. So of course, usage is one thing and acknowledgement is another. Both things go in line, and then of course you're not becoming a victim of plagiarism. But in the case in which you are missing this acknowledgement, this reference, this citation that we are going to see what it actually is to avoid plagiarism, of course you are becoming a victim of it. We talk about that concise Oxford Dictionary definition of what plagiarism is: taking and using the thoughts, writings and inventions of another person as one's own. So you are basically getting the idea that it all begins with the idea, then that idea can have any form. That one form could be writing, and if you are simply stealing that idea, or that idea being represented in the form of writing by one source without referring to that source, if you are saying that idea and even that writing belongs to me, that means you are performing, simply becoming a victim of plagiarism. You are committing the crime of plagiarism, and which is seriously a wrong thing. If we talk about in journal, now where is this thing seen in case of an academic environment, the environment in which you belong? There would be, I'm not saying specifically any, or are simply not pinpointing individuals, but in journal you can clearly observe within your surroundings so many people around you who may even ask you that kindly give us your assignment, we would like to have an idea what it is and how to simply attempt the question provided by the instructor or by our teacher. We would like to have an idea. If they have an idea and then they come up with something of their own, that's fine. But if you feel like the other person has simply copied everything and then pasted it or written it just the way it was in your case, then there are two copies being submitted to one person who is going to check. Don't you think he or she is going to realize things are being copy pasted? So this also falls under the category of plagiarism, copy pasted assignments. In a similar way, people simply conducting research, if we talk about even the ideas of one person being simply stolen by another person who simply does all the research, who was the first person who came up with the idea? And that idea has been stolen and done by the other person. So you have to be a bit careful even while conversing. You should know with whom you can talk and with whom you can share the idea, so that you can avoid idea plagiarism to a good extent as well, because this is something where it falls. It's one category of plagiarism where ideas are being stolen just the way I have shown you within the definitions that it's not just restricted to writing, but if it's even your own idea which is stolen, and on that idea some other person has worked and provided all the results, getting all the fame, that means you became a victim of idea plagiarism. So these things should be there in mind. First you have to understand it in detail. Once you know all these things fall under plagiarism, only then you would be in a position to avoid it. That's how this plagiarism becomes important, going to be our topic, and I'll show you what are the different forms of plagiarism, how your writing can become part of plagiarism, and once you know this is plagiarism, you would know how to avoid this similarity as well from the original source. Of course, you will become a master of it, I'm very sure, once you are aware of the things. So let's start. First point, of course, is that from those definitions you have got the idea that it's basically the act of stealing the identity, the language, the thought, the ideas and expression of another individual or his work, and then claiming it to be your own contribution. This is something which is happening. Most important being, you have taken the other person's identity as well. Not just language, thoughts and ideas, because these ideas were affiliated or associated with that person. So if you are saying that this thing belongs to you, so don't you think you are claiming the identity of the other person as well? So this identity shift is also part of plagiarism as well. Using others' words and ideas without acknowledging the source. This is the second meaning, which I have just explained to you based on those definitions which we have just seen. So you need to acknowledge the source, because if you are not doing it, once again, you are doing plagiarism. Passing off someone else's work and ideas as your own. So not just restricted to the idea, but even based on that idea, one person has done some work, some contribution, and all of a sudden you get hold of it and then claiming it to be your own work. Plagiarism. So what does it include? Copying a document, be it all or a part of that document. Copying a website, be it a part of it or the whole of it. And even an image. Sometimes there are parts of some images which are relevant to your work, and then you just take it and claim it that I have drawn it. Once again, plagiarism. In all the above cases, there is no reference to the original source. So source reference is missing, and references are important even if you look at our own slides. Have you noticed that there is always a reference? That reference, that link which is there at the bottom of these slides, it indicates that this is the original source from which the examples, the pertinent examples, other than the ones which are created, have been provided so that you can access the original examples for your further and better understanding. Some of the background information points. In journal, ideas are shared and expressed following the long established principles of originality and integrity. This is something that we do all the time. It's part of that two-way process which is known as knowledge. You gain knowledge by this sending and receiving. Sending and receiving is also quoted at some point when we talk about, of course, communication. So from that communication, we are basically gaining and transferring knowledge. So this has to be done based on some established principles of originality and integrity. So either a point or an idea being shared should be an original one, of course, coming from your own intellect, from your own rational thinking. If that is not the case, then comes the second point, that if you are referring to the other person's idea, referring and acknowledging that that is the actual source that you are quoting, and that reference is going to make your even contribution more authentic, more credible, because you are acknowledging the other person. This is the point. You acknowledge individual contribution to human knowledge. That is how the knowledge is gained and transferred. What else do? You reinforce credibility of scholarship, because this scholarship, this process of gaining knowledge is all about when you are contributing in the existing body of knowledge by reading literature which is around you, relevant to your subject matter, and once you are dealing with all that subject matter, you are citing and referring to each and every source that you are reading just to gain your knowledge, and after that knowledge you come up with your own contribution to enhance that knowledge or to contribute within that human knowledge. That is how you basically are becoming part of that scholarship. Scholarship is not just that funding that you get, but it's more or less a big and a generic term which covers the whole process of research, a process of contributing within the existing body of knowledge. That's how you become a research scholar. If these principles are not followed, what is the result? Once again, plagiarism. So this is why This background information is very much important, and I want you to keep all these points in mind. Now, after this awareness, and still you are performing that plagiarism, if I say it in journal so that you would be able to understand it. Once again, if you are copy pasting material, let's suppose in your own context, you are being assigned different topics to work on, in which you have to come up with something, some written content, be it a report, but you are simply getting things from the other sources without giving a reference, just stating things as though they are your own. What are the consequences that you're going to face? For a student like you, violation of an academic discipline, because in almost in every assignment, in every task, it's clearly stated, clearly written that no copy pasting is allowed, no plagiarism should be there. There is a strict policy, and of course that policy will be mentioned in the upcoming lecture as well, as the policy finalized and stated, disseminated by the Higher Education Commission. We'll be talking about it as well, but just talking about the repercussions in journal, violation of academic discipline in case of an accidental plagiarism. Basically it results from a careless note taking, so it is a possibility that this thing can happen by an accident, that your content may turn out to be quite similar to the content prepared by another individual, some set of phrases or some words or the ideas or the context which is quite similar to the one which has already been prepared. So that can be a case of accidental plagiarism. However, if it is purposeful, then this is going to certainly affect your grades, class standing, and if this thing continues, you will be rusticated and expelled from the school. So I don't think, if the teacher tells you again and again that this thing is being copy pasted and you have to avoid it, do you consider it to be an accidental plagiarism? I don't think so. I believe that this thing is purposeful and would certainly fall within this category. But I believe most of our students, many of you of course, would be well aware of this fact and are writing things on your own. I'm very much sure of it, and I believe in your abilities. And I want you to tell the others as well, that those who think that copy pasting is an easier way to come up with things and complete tasks in time, they should be encouraged and motivated to write things on their own as well, by of course enhancing, sharpening and developing their own writing skills. By telling them that believe in yourself, you really can write, just follow up the lectures, you have all the strategies you need to become a good writer. Because of course, if that is not happening, your whole career may be affected as well, because your grading will be affected, and if that transcript has poor performance, how do you expect from an employer to hire you to work in that company or that organization? So in the long run, this is going to have a very bad impact over your whole personality, that portfolio or that profile that you're going to present for yourself will look quite negative for you. So to have a good impact, become a good writer by writing things on your own rather than taking other people's material and claiming it to be your own. In case you are a professional, now you have got the job and now you are working and still commit plagiarism, so you may lose your job as a result of it. That's how this serious crime this is, and that's how you should be well aware of it, and that's why you have to avoid it. So if we move ahead, this is the point and how to avoid it. If you are writing about someone else's work, present your own ideas and expression about that work. So this is strategy number one, that if you are writing about someone else's work, be it a book or an article or anything, so try to present your ideas and expression first of all in your own words. In case of using ideas and expression of another person which are not your own regarding any work, of course, then comes the point that you have to identify and mention the origin in cases such as idea, opinion and theory of another person, graphs, drawing, facts and statistics developed by another person, quotations of another person's spoken or written word, paraphrase of another person's spoken or written words. So even if it's a paraphrase of another person's words, even then you have to identify and mention the origin in such cases as well. Because of course you're basically changing things, paraphrasing things, but the actual source of the actual idea is still someone else, so that person has to be mentioned, referred and identified and mentioned. So that's how you basically begin with this avoidance of plagiarism. Quotation. If we talk about the quotations, whenever you have to refer to quotation within your writing of another person, of course, I'm not saying writing which you have developed as a result of paraphrasing. You are stating things just the way they have been said, they have been written by another person. So basically, quotations are used with three conditions. They are either written in in-text form or a block text form. You'll be wondering what these are. Basically, if you are writing in a paragraph and then all of a sudden you have to stop and simply place a quotation over there, so that quotation, which is like becoming part of the text which you are writing, let's suppose this basically is a quote and then once again you have started writing, so this is coming within the text, so this is in text. Whereas if you are writing, now these are your lines which you are writing and all of a sudden there is a big text which you are about to write, that would exist here in a block form. You will write it separately and then once again you will start writing. So this block form, because of course this code is a bit long, so this is also a block text format which is followed in different referencing style. Of course this text or the quotation is written separately. Of course it's a quotation, so it will come under quotation marks. These are the quotation marks in which it's written. So this is basically the difference of writing within the text and out of the text in the form of block. Then it should be an exact form, just as I have written under quotation marks, and then citation under standard documentation style. There are styles and we'll be looking into these styles within detail in lecture number 24, but for now the target is to show you what are the different forms of plagiarism and how you are basically, despite writing, becoming a victim of plagiarism. You are performing plagiarism, and once you know, oh, even this thing falls in plagiarism, I have to avoid it. What are the reasons why this thing is becoming plagiarism? So let's have a look at it. The examples are there to make things easier for you. Now just have a look over here. This is what I mean by providing a reference. Over here you have a clear-cut reference coming at the bottom, from which basically this is the source from which everything is being provided. So on the left hand side, this box is the original wording. Such story myths are not told for their entertainment value. They provide answers to questions which people ask about life, about society and about the world in which they live. Once you have written it, now here on the right hand side, despite written, it's a plagiarized version. But I want you to focus more on the text which is in red. Story myths are not, entertainment and answers to questions people ask about life and about society. Now why these are red is basically that I can clearly identify all these expressions over here as well. Story myths are not, entertainment. So expressions are clearly identifiable within the original wording and the plagiarized version. So even we have this box over here which will clearly show you that there is a word-for-word copy of the original source. Then there are quotation marks which are not used because you have taken direct expressions, word-to-word expression from the original source, and still you are not using any quotation mark. Then there is no reference being provided. Of course, such reference which we have provided of this source has to be provided by the person who is writing about this content. That reference has to be there because of course direct word-to-word copy of the source is coming, not even any quotation marks, then not even any reference. So things are missing, even no credit to the author. So if I am saying all these things, of course your question would be coming in your mind, sir, how to write it in the correct form? Well, let me show you how can it be written in correct form. Once again the same wording, but now a corrected version. Davidson explains, you have an author, that the story myths, now you have the quotation marks. Questions about life, again quotation marks. About society and about the world in which they live. And then a number. Numbering, of course, indicating towards the end note. It's a mode of citation that we'll be talking about, the matter of citation. These are footnotes, endnotes, and of course parenthetical citation, which we will be discussing in lecture number 24. And then when you will revert back and look at any other place, even in future, whenever there is a number, a superscript number right after a sentence, you'll know, okay, there's either going to be a footnote or an endnote, so no issue at all. So things pointed out for you as well. Now there is a use of quotation mark, there is an insertion of author name, and page reference is also given, so there is a reference. So these are the things which are going to make a difference and to avoid plagiarism. Otherwise, the software which detects this plagiarism is going to make things very crystal clear for the person who is going to evaluate you, that this has been copied and pasted and being claimed to be the individual person's own hard work. However, that is not the case. So that is how you're going to make a difference. If you look at another example, this is the original wording, and alongside this is basically the plagiarized version. This is the original, this is the plagiarized version. Now once again, this thing has been made red because this is the expression for which it's clearly written here that word-to-word copy of the original source. There are no quotation marks used, credit not being there for the author, and no reference being provided either. Once again, we are facing the same problem, because of which we are becoming a victim of plagiarism. Okay, now if we have to correct it, so what are the changes? Now you have seen from the previous example, so now this example is going to make things even more easier for you to understand. So first, if I take toward this block, you're going to see that author and year of publication is now given. That's how. Quotation marks are used as well to indicate that this is the text which is directly taken from the source along with page number. So that is how you have made a difference. These are the points which have simply helped you to avoid plagiarism, because you are authenticating things, acknowledging the effort of the actual person who is the source. Now moving ahead and coming towards the actual thing, which is citation. Whenever you are simply referring to things, writing the name of the author and then writing the year, name, and then the year, and then it's not New York, name and year, and then a bracket close. So this is basically that in-text citation that you provide alongside that text written, and of course whether it's a quotation or whether it's a paraphrasing, but the point here is you always cite it. This is citation. So regarding that citation, what do we have to offer? What points should be there in your mind? Common knowledge is not generally documented. For example, this is a very clear-cut statement for which you do not require a citation. However, facts that are generally not known are documented. You know that these are facts, should be known, but these facts should be known and the people should be made well aware of these facts by giving them a proof. So that proof is basically in the form of a citation. Comments, opinions, and interpretation about facts are also very much documented. Like, despite serving 2 terms, W. Bush was popularly elected only once in 2006. So now comments and opinions are here. Text deleted for shortening should be indicated with ellipses with proper citations. So this is also something commonly done as well within your writing. This is basically ellipses being used. I'm referring to these 3 dots. Hopefully these are visible on your screen as well. I have drawn these 3 dots. Whenever you are writing, all of a sudden if you want to avoid a long sentence, you simply place these 3 dots and then you sum it all up to make a sentence short. So The use of the ellipsis is also used, but it should be done alongside proper citation, just the way this one is. Cite together the quotes taken from a single paragraph from its different sections. So if you have a big paragraph and you have taken points from two different sections, let's suppose one being a topic sentence, first any phrase from a topic sentence, and then any third or second supporting detail, and from that detail you have extracted another phrase. So when you are pointing them out, just the way Alice point are decay of family and alongside completely justified. So for that, as these have been taken from a single place, a single paragraph, so there is a single reference. For that, citation. In case of a widely separated parts of a work, or in case of more than one work, cite them independently. So in case that the parts of a work are widely apart, not just adjacent paragraphs, but being separate chapters. So in that case, of course, as you can see, the essay says on one hand that geologic time is itself. Now this point is ending over here, and then but in saying so contradicts himself, having started earlier that it is essentially the same scale. So two separate points being pointed out, just the way there is a contradiction of what a writer has said earlier and what the writer has said afterwards. So the contradiction is being pointed out, but it has to be pointed out with proofs. This proof is coming here by pointing out those specific pages 86 and 13. So that is how you provide a reference when it's wide apart. In case of more than one work, then you basically once again cite them separately, as over here, two separate references separated by a semicolon. One reference this one, the other one this. Over here you have the name of the writer, and alongside you have the year. Over here this is basically the source of writing, so that's why you see Gazette Times, and over here Herald Tribune. So these are the sources alongside the dates. Your own comments can be inserted as well in a quote using square brackets. So if you want to add anything, what could it be? For explaining a point, for identifying a referent, for explaining or replacing an abbreviation. So if there is an abbreviation, we have one for you. Starting gradually from point number 1, if you have to explain a point, CEO finally decided not to file a challenge to the court's acceptance of amicus briefs, and then comments on legal points filed by, you are explaining things. What these are? These are comments on legal points filed by parties not involved. Moving ahead, if you have to identify a referent, in a Saturday's evening, his biographer would not attempt to explain how the reclusive novelist would allow them, the anonymous Times reviewer, to go unchallenged. And then if you have to explain or replace an abbreviation, just as we have DSM 4 TRF, let's suppose I'm doing it right, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, yes, 4th edition. I was just a bit confused about this, that it should be 4 if I am not wrong. So Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, you are simply explaining the whole abbreviation, and that's how you basically explain, identify all the points which should be explained within square brackets in your comment section. Now paraphrasing. Basically the first point to understand is that what paraphrasing is. So you basically present someone else's idea by putting them in your own words. This is basically a paraphrase, but it has to be done under some rules, some standards and conventions. So a correct paraphrase needs to be a condensed version of another author's work. So it has to be in condensed form, an original articulation of another author's ideas, then structured differently from the original. This is also something, of course, if you are not doing it and if you are using similar constructions, you have to place quotation mark, because if you will not, again, plagiarism, and need to be cited properly. So these are the points which makes a text a paraphrase of another. It should be condensed, made concrete than an original articulation. If that idea is original, you have to simply reflect the same idea by the use of different words. Only then it would be an original articulation, because you are simply structuring it differently and you are providing a proper citation for it as well. That's how you do paraphrasing. If we move ahead, what makes things an inappropriate paraphrase? Using with only slight changes the material of another. Of course, you're not changing the whole structure and you're not structuring it differently, just doing minor changes of few words. Ideas being presented in the same sequence as in the original source with only the insertion of synonyms. So this use of synonyms or synonymous terms is not something through which you can develop originality or a paraphrase. You are basically once again doing the same thing of plagiarism, just replacing one word with its synonym. I came across certain assignments in which the same thing was observed, that only if you just right click on a word, and it will provide, the Microsoft Word document also provides synonym for the word which has been selected, and replacing it with that synonym and claiming it to be a new work is also becoming an inappropriate paraphrase, leading towards plagiarism. So it has to be avoided as well. Then if you are providing no citation for the paraphrase which you have done, once again plagiarism, and credit not being given to the original author. This credit can be done by simply using a signal word or a signal phrase in which you say, according to X, this thing has to be done by this, or X believes this thing has to be done this way. Well, you are referring to that Mr. X or Mr. Y, that person, that is basically a signal phrase, and you are simply giving credit of all the work, all the words which you are using to that Mr. X. This is basically signaling that you do with signal words and signal phrases, and it has to be done either at the beginning or within the citation that you use within brackets. Now let's have a look of inappropriate paraphrase, or we would say plagiarized version of the original wording. You have an example here. Developing complex skills in the classroom involves the key ingredients identified in teaching pigeons to play ping pong and to bowl. The key ingredients are inducing a response, reinforcing subtle improvements, providing for the transfer of stimulus, scheduling reinforcements, the ratio of reinforcements, and so on and so forth. A long detailed example, but the point here is that we are calling it as a plagiarized version. This is basically the plagiarized version. If I just simply start pointing out, once again I can tell you that there are certain points which I can clearly see over here which are similar to the one which are provided above. So these are the points which are quite similar and being pointed out by simply looking at the two texts. If I just make it easy for you, look at the box. Only the original author's words have been moved around, inserting and deleting small portions as needed. So that's how it became a bit tricky for me to find out the places where words have been moved around, but I found them. So once again, this is not paraphrasing, this is plagiarism. The original author has not been even credited either. So once again, another error because of which not accepted. Source also there. Now, how to make it correct? So if we look at the corrected version, according to Gredler, and now you have a reference, you can clearly see the details of it as well. Same factors applying to developing complex skills in a classroom. So rather going into detail, the point is there is a proper reference given to the author and year of publication, and then since paraphrasing occurred, so quotation marks are not used. So basically it's a paraphrase. The point here is that when you are paraphrasing, changing into new words, of course it's not the exact reported speech, which is basically being provided here within the text. That is why there is no need of quotation marks. But whenever you are using the exact words of that person that you are quoting, that you are referring to, then always use quotation marks. Another example here for you to have an idea. Such story myths are not told for their entertainment value, and then you move ahead. And in the plagiarized version, Davidson explained that myths answer questions about life. Again, there is a reference of the writer. Then why is it being a plagiarized version? Well, the problem is only the original author words have been moved around, once again inserting and deleting small portions as needed. And then there is no even reference by the original writer. Of course, we have provided you with a reference because we do not wish to perform plagiarism. This is our purpose, to teach you that whenever you have to quote any example, mention anything which belongs to someone else, always provide the reference of the source to credit and to acknowledge their individual work. So that's how you basically get free from the act of plagiarism. Taking you towards the corrected version, as Davidson explained, the importance of story myths is in their relevance to the everyday lives of their reader, and then the same construction, but the point it is original articulation of the idea, author is introduced at the beginning, and then a proper citation, just the way this one we have provided, has been provided by the writer as well, and you place it in the reference list. So just the way we have provided the source, a proper MLA style or the APA style, there are different referencing styles, but the point here is to provide a reference at the end of every reference that you want to make. This is how you can get free from plagiarism, or you can avoid it. Now talking about some other point with respect to paraphrasing. Putting others' ideas in your own words does not mean that you ignore the acknowledgement of the source. You have to basically acknowledge the source, even it's a paraphrase. Because if you are not acknowledging, then once again you are becoming a victim of plagiarism. Because you are not acknowledging, because on one hand you are sharing the other person's ideas, and on the other hand you are not appreciating, not crediting. So once again, even in the case of paraphrasing, it's plagiarism. Therefore, it should be the case that you provide a reference to it. Now you have a text over here, and with reference to it, we are going to talk about, for example, a text taken from pages 16 to 17 of, this is basically the work written by David M. Potter, 1976. No need to go into the detail. If I take you towards the next slide, you'll have an idea. This is basically a sample of an unacceptable paraphrasing, which is basically an example of plagiarism. You can compare it in detail to have an idea what are the basic points. Before moving ahead, basically, you have this command, you have this mouse in front of you. Just click over it, pause the video, and for a while just have an idea by looking at the slides, the previous one and this one, how is this becoming plagiarism? You'll have an idea. But to make it more easier for you, there are some points which alongside you get the solutions as well. What were basically the problems identified and how you can resolve them, and that will come into a solution. There should be few words, phrases, and the order of the original sentences have been changed. So that is also something unethical and unacceptable. That if you have some sentence or phrases, selecting few specific words which are looking a bit irrelevant, and you removing them, and the rest of it is being claimed to be your own work, or you have done the paraphrasing. It's not even pressy, to be honest with you. This is not even pressy writing, because pressy writing also has its own strategies, some tricks, some tools, some tips through which you are able to write a pressy out of the big text, which is of course considered to be a 1/3 of the original. So even removing few words is not pressy. And how do you expect to do paraphrasing by doing this technique? So basic point is, use your own words to relay idea from the original text. You have to relay, of course, the main idea, but try to use your own words. Moving ahead, no citation in that plagiarized or paraphrased version, no citation, which means you always have to cite the original source of the information. If we move ahead, you have an example of an acceptable paraphrasing, as you can see, a reference, and then some good points of flowing the whole idea, of course, coming up in your own words. So I want you to give a reading to this one, the plagiarized one and the original one. You will certainly say that yes sir, this one is really like an acceptable paraphrasing, because we find ideas and of course in a new way, and then with a proper reference citation of the original source. That's how you can make a difference and avoid committing plagiarism in case of paraphrasing. Quotation and paraphrasing used together. This is also very much possible in case of your paraphrasing and quotations. You can simply cite things together, and you can quote and paraphrase together as well, because that sometimes you want to write things in your own words, and there are places where you want to use the exact quoted words of the person that you are citing. So you can do the same over here as well. You find a good reference here, then you simply flow the ideas even in your own words, and at points you are using the exact words, of course coming in quotation marks in the form of reported speech. So things can be together as well, as you can clearly see over here. Just give a reading and you will have an idea that both things are going side by side. Interpretation in new words and the use of existing words. Now we are saying that there is no plagiarism, so what is basically the reason or the tips? I can also say those tips through which you are basically avoiding plagiarism. You are accurately presenting ideas from the original message. You are using quotation mark to indicate parts taken directly from the source. You are citing the sources to credit the author. Directly quoting from the source without placing the quotation marks would also be plagiarism despite citing the source. Now this point is also very much important, which is why it's in red. You are directly quoting from the source but not placing the quotation marks. At the end of the day, or at the end of writing, you once again provide an in-text citation, but still this will be crossed because you have missed a very important point, the use of these quotation marks. Why did you miss it? You have to indicate that this thing is basically said by that person, and to indicate that fact, it should be there within the quotation marks as well, because whenever it will be evaluated, there are softwares, they are going to detect as well that the citation being provided is for what. The text would be seen, especially the one which is there within the quotation marks. So if there is no quotation marks, you're basically missing the point, and the reported speech is becoming part of your own speech, and therefore will become automatically plagiarism. So that's how you are becoming part of plagiarism, and we have to be very much careful to use these quotation marks, then these brackets, and then a full stop, and that's how you'll avoid it. So tips of paraphrasing are: read carefully until you understand the whole content. Cover the content which you have just read. For example, you have to write, you have to paraphrase a content which has been provided to you. Read it carefully, understand the main point, then cover it up, put some book over it or put it aside. Then do the exercise of writing what you have read, the basic idea, in your own words. You got the idea, now try to write it in your own words without looking or peeing into what was there within the original page. Once you have written it, then compare the original source with the one which you have written, and then make a note clearly identifying a source. Once you have done the comparison, you realize what are the points which look a bit similar. So if there are similar phrases and words, just try to write them once again with some other alternate words. Try to find another way of expressing the same idea, so that the idea remains the same, but the flow or the mode of telling or expressing becomes different. So that's how you're doing paraphrasing. And once again, you have to make a clear note of identifying the source. In case of plagiarism in IT, the point is that internet has basically made things quite accessible. You can clearly access things on a single click, just the way you can make me start my lecture with a single click. Whenever you have to watch a lecture, you can just click, play the video, I'll start speaking. Whenever you want me to pause, you can pause. Whenever you want me to stop, I can even stop as well. So it all depends on you. But the point here is, internet has made things quite easy. You can access all the research work which is being done by a few clicks by searching on the different search engines. So now coming towards the point is that, of course, it has helped you to access scholarly database, pertinent materials also easily available. However, in case of online plagiarism, this thing has also become possible, has become very easy that you take one thing from one side, other thing from the other side and place it all together and then say this thing belongs to me. But the point here is that if it is easy for you to find all the relevant material and to place it on a single page and claiming it to be your own, well, the point is that the easier it has become for you, the easier it has become for the other person as well, who has to check the material and to check whether you have written it yourself or you have also collected it from different sources. So if you have done it in a similar pace, they'll find out and they'll let you know that these are the sources from which the material has been copied, pasted and being claimed to be your own. Well, that is not the case. So for that purpose, you have to use these online sources and must be cited as the documentation of a printed source. Try to cite all these sources just the way it has to be done under different referencing styles, if you're going to see in the upcoming lectures as well. Talking about copyright, this is also a very important point, because in case of plagiarism, it applies to all sources, basically being a moral issue. But talking about copyright, this is basically considered to be a legal issue. What it basically is, definition will help you out: a legally stated list of rights belonging to the author of a work. So point here is that these are some of the rights that a person legally gets, as a result of which whenever the other individual wants to cite or to refer to that person, first he or she has to take permission of that person who has these copyrights. If the copyright owner allows the other person to have all the material which he wants to cite in the other work, of course then he can do the citation. But if the owner of these copyright does not allow or does not permit the other person to use the material, then he can't do so. Otherwise he can be tried in court, he can be litigated, and once again he can be prosecuted. But the point here is that these are the basic differences when it comes to plagiarism and copyright. So in case of your copyright, you are basically required to seek a written permission from the owner of a work. In journal, you cannot cite the material without this prior permission. If you are permitted, no worries. But if you are not permitted, here is a level of how much extent you can do some sort of exercise related to the citation. In case there is no permission, the material may possibly be used and cited as long as it stays as an academic assignment within the domain of an institution. So the point here is that if it stays within an institution being used for an academic purpose, for that it's okay. But whenever it crosses the limit of these institution, then it is going to be a lot of trouble. And of course the other person is making those things by going or bypassing the domain or the range or the boundary of an institution, making it public, and once it is going public can cause a lot of trouble. So therefore this is the difference of copyright and plagiarism. Of course in both cases, on one hand, in case of plagiarism, you have to credit and acknowledge, but if it's the matter of copyright, then you are bound to first take permission, a written permission from the other person, and that written permission, if allowed to you, can simply lead you towards the usage or the citation of all the works that you want to make part of your material. So these are the points about which you have to be careful. The content may not go beyond a campus. Even if it's a web page, you have to avoid it, because a web page is also public. and it will lead towards copyright violation. It's always better to paraphrase the material. In journal, it shouldn't be more than 1 or 2 sentences, otherwise you have to seek permission. So this is basically a point when there are copyrights. Of course, in other cases, of course, you can just simply cite the material, but in case there are copyrights and you simply want to refer to more than 1 or 2 sentences, then you have to seek permission. And permission must be there in printed form, and you have to keep a hard copy of the record as well, so that whenever there is a problem which arises, you may know how to resolve it because you will have all the written record. Some of the other practices which constitute plagiarism, these are there in front of you as well. You simply, if you have no idea how to organize the material, and if you are using the material or the mode of organizing the ideas of another person, once again, this is becoming plagiarism. You talk about submitting someone else's work or material as your own, once again, this is also plagiarism. You failing to reference or footnote a material, once again, you're missing a very authentic source, automatically making it a claim that this belongs to you, again, plagiarism. Then collusion. Collusion is something that there is a work which has been done by you as well as some of your group members. So it's a collective effort. But rather than acknowledging their efforts, you just highlighting the fact that it's your own work, it's collusion, and this become plagiarism as well. False citation, documenting outside sources that were not actually there, totally the opposite, that a single person has done all the research or all the work, and some 3 or 4 people say, we'll pay you and kindly include our name as well within this list, because it's very much needed for us that we require some sort of reference. We have to mention it that we have publications, and therefore please kindly include our name as well in the list which comes when your paper will be published. So that is also false citation. So, and even this becoming a fact that the name of the person is not there whom you are trying to cite within your work. So that simple work is not something which has been done by the person that you are mentioning here. So that also becomes plagiarism as well. It's a bit tricky, which is why it becomes difficult for me to explain as well, but hopefully I've explained all the points. In case of multiple submission of an academic work, yes, this is also another point, because in journal, whenever you write something for a university, so you always say this thing has been done in partial fulfillment for the degree that I am doing, and it will not be published, it will not be shared or submitted to any other organization as well to gain any benefit or advantage. So if you are doing so, you are once again performing plagiarism. Of course, you can extract something out of that work which you have done for one organization, but exactly submitting the same thing in another organization, which sometimes happen as well, that you writing one paper, I'm not saying you means some individuals who are writing single paper and then publishing in separate conferences, that if I get rejected here, it will be accepted there, I would be able to present. That is also becoming plagiarism as well, and it has to be avoided too.
Mr. Brown teaches a course on organizational behavior. He gave the students an assignment with strict instructions to avoid plagiarism. Meet Steve. He is a student in Mr. Brown's class. He spent a lot of time on the assignment trying not to plagiarize. He even missed the deadline for the submission of the assignment while creating it from scratch. That's because he misinterpreted the meaning of plagiarism. Mr. Brown decided to explain to the class what plagiarism is and how to avoid it. He described how you can stand on the shoulders of giants rather than creating your own wheel. Let's review some basic tips on plagiarism as discussed in the lecture, just like Mr. Anmol did in Lecture 23. Plagiarism is the deliberate use of another's work without giving proper credit. It is an academic theft and is considered intellectual dishonesty. Plagiarism can lead to unfavorable consequences. Since it is a violation of academic discipline, for students, plagiarism may lead to embarrassment and deduction of marks. Professionals can even lose their jobs for plagiarized work. But how to avoid it is the big question. If you are writing about someone else's work, present your own ideas and expressions. If you want to use the ideas and expressions which are not your own, Then properly identify and mention the origin. There is a proper way to refer others' work to avoid plagiarism. Quotes less than 40 words should be incorporated into the text of the paragraph, enclosed in quotation marks. Include the author's name, year of publication, and the page number for reference. Quotes comprising of 40 or more words are written in block text. Omit the quotation marks, but present the quote on a new line. Indent halfway from the left margin, and maintain double spacing throughout the quote. The citation should come after the closing punctuation mark, enclosed in parentheses. Comments, opinions, and interpretation of facts are documented, but common knowledge is not generally cited. Moreover, your own comments can be inserted within the quotation using square brackets. Paraphrasing can also help to remove plagiarism. It is presenting someone else's ideas in your own words. A correct paraphrase needs to be in your own words, properly condensed, and correctly cited. It should be structured differently from the original. The key to correctly paraphrasing is to read carefully to understand the idea. Then present the idea, making sure to cover the whole content by placing it in your own words. The important thing to remember to stay away from plagiarism is to clearly identify the source. Plagiarism applies to all sources and becomes a moral issue. Proper citation can do the trick. Whereas copyrights apply to few sources but becomes a legal issue. In case of copyright, you need a written permission from the owner to use their work. Other practices that constitute plagiarism include borrowing organization, submitting another's material as your own, failing to refer material properly, collusion or false citation, and multiple submission of academic work. Now that you know what plagiarism is, hope you will try your best to refrain from it.
Some of the references for understanding more about plagiarism, but so far this is the end of our today's lecture. I would say we have talked about the basics of plagiarism, how to insert or how to cite quotations, how basically to cite the material itself, and then talking about paraphrasing, what it is and what are the tips through which you can avoid plagiarism. And in the next lecture, we're going to talk about some referencing styles, looking into detail about MLA as well as APA. APA being used within the university itself, quite common in other places as well, so we'll be looking into it in detail with some examples as well. But till that time, have a good idea what plagiarism is and how it is developed within writing, and once you know it, you would be able to avoid it as well. So hopefully, I believe that within the upcoming assignments, within the upcoming tasks, you will never let plagiarism get hold of your work. So I see you in the next lecture. Till that time, take good care. Assalamu alaikum and thank you.